I shave my honey buns. This your girl, Empress Goddess, the Georgia peach with the sweet meat. I hope you're well today. Welcome back. The Georgia peach with the sweet meat. I hope you're well. I tell you, it never fails. Every time I get ready to go live, somebody call me. But I'm trying to go ahead and finish up this series. I'm trying to keep the lives kind of short because I notice if I have real long lives, I don't think it holds people's attention very long, especially the younger generation. So here we go again with the African origins of modern humanity. I ain't gonna keep repeating the same thing over and over again. You got eyes, you know how to read, so read the description box below. Now, in short, I will say this: that this this audio book explains what we black people, melanated, already knew all our life. That everybody came from us. So this is scientific evidence. That I mean, hopefully people will believe scientific evidence since they didn't want to believe us. Anyway, I'm not gonna talk too long. My head trying to hurt a little bit. I really need to try to get me some rest, but I need to try to push this out. I need to get all this information out because that's my purpose, my love, to raise the consciousness of the collective, to give the truth, to shine light on the truth, speak the truth. All right, my loves, here we go. The African origin of modern humanity. Part 3.
The first Asians. The first AMH out of Africa. In the previous chapter, we saw that the first AMH to leave Africa did so around 100,000 years ago. Current fossil and archaeological evidence suggests that the first dispersal of anatomically modern humans out of Africa took the form of a temporary occupation of the Levant at approximately 100 to 90 Ka, based upon remains found at the sites of School and Kopsa. Cranial diversity in South Asian relative to modern human dispersals and global patterns of human variation by J. Stock, M. Mirazon Lar, and Samanti Kulatalake in The Evolution and History of Human Populations in South Asia by editors M.D. Petraglia and B. Alchin, Springer 2007, page 246. By the term Levant is meant the strip of Asia that is called Syro-Palestine. Tectonically, it is on the African plate, making it a geographical extension of Africa. School and Kopsa are two caves in the part of the southern Levant, today known as Israel. There are 2 points that should be made about these fossils. One, it is widely believed that they did not leave any descendants. And two, they had archaic features reminiscent of Neanderthals, such as heavy brow ridges. It is thought by some that this was the result of intermixture. From the latter site came a skull known as Kopsa 9. It has been reconstructed to provide an idea of what genetic Eve looked like, and she is clearly of sub-Saharan appearance. The second AMH out of Africa. Around 60,000 years ago, another OOA migration took place. Genetic studies strongly suggest that all non-Africans alive today are descended from this migration. The first evidence of their arrival was from a cave in the African tectonic extension known as Israel. An ancient skull discovered in Israel could shed light on the migration of modern humans out of Africa some 60,000 years ago. The skull from Manot Cave dates to 55,000 years ago and may be the closest we've got to finding one of the earliest migrants from Africa. The skull is very gracile. There is nothing that makes it any different from a modern skull. Professor Israel Hershkovitz from Tel Aviv University. He added, "This is the first evidence that shows indeed there was a large wave of migrants out of East Africa, crossing the Sahara and the Nubian Desert and inhabiting the Eastern Mediterranean region 55,000 years ago. So it is really a key skull in understanding modern human evolution. Physical features of the skull, such as a distinctive bun-shaped region at the back, resemble those found in the earliest modern humans from Europe. This implies that the Manot people were probably the forefathers of many of the early Upper Paleolithic populations of Europe." Professor Hershkovitz said, Skull Clue to Exodus from Africa by Paul Rincon, BBC News. The article directly states that the Manot skull has a craniofacial feature that is also found in the first EUP skulls from Europe. This feature is known by the technical term occipital bunning. It is associated with narrow skulls and cranial bases, a tropical adaptation. The article also directly states that the Manot skull is part of a migration from sub-Saharan Africa, implying that it resembled skulls from that population region. The oldest skull from East Asia appears to agree with the 60,000-year timeline. Newfound pieces of human skull from the Cave of the Monkeys in Laos are the earliest skeletal evidence yet that humans once had an ancient, rapid migration to Asia. The shape of the bone and teeth is distinctly anatomically modern human, not like those of an extinct lineage such as the Neanderthals. A variety of dating techniques of the sediments surrounding the fossils suggests they are at least 46,000 to 51,000 years old, and direct dating of the bone suggests a maximum age of about 63,000 years. This makes these fossils the earliest skeletal evidence for anatomically modern humans east of the Middle East. Oldest bones from modern humans in Asia discovered by Charles Q. Choi, August 2012. The oldest evidence of AMH from China, however, is following a different script. Several lines of evidence, including genetics and archaeology, support a dispersal of our species from Africa 60,000 years ago. Now, excavations at Fuyuan Cave in Daoshan have unearthed a trove of 47 human teeth. Professor Chris Stringer from London's Natural History Museum said the new study was a game changer in the debate about the spread of modern humans. Many workers, often including me, have argued that the early dispersal of modern humans from Africa into the Levant, recorded by the fossils from School and Kafsa at about 120,000 years ago, was essentially a failed dispersal, which went little or no further than Israel. However, the large sample of teeth from Daoshan seem unquestionably modern in their size and morphology, and they look to be well dated by uranium-thorium methods to at least 80,000 years. At first sight, this seems to be consistent with an early dispersal across southern Asia by a population resembling those known from School and Kafsa. Fossil teeth place humans in Asia 20,000 years early, by Paul Rincon, 14 October 2015, BBC News. Professor Stringer, however, is guarded about such an interpretation. He reminds us in the same article that the School Kafsa teeth have far more ancestral features than the Daoshan teeth, and questions whether the latter arose from the former in just 40,000 years. He concludes that the Daoshan humans lost these ancestral features in a relatively short time frame, or they could have come from an early dispersal of AMH that looked more modern than the more archaic-looking School Kafsa humans. There is, however, another possibility. The School Kafsa archaic traits of the skull and teeth have been associated with Neanderthal interbreeding in West Asia. If this is true, there must have been a time when the School Kafsa people had not yet undergone Neanderthal intermixture. If some of them had headed south, they would have avoided Neanderthal intermixture altogether. They would have ended up following the same southern route towards East Asia cited by Professor Stringer in the article. What did these first East Asian people look like? Did they still resemble their sub-Saharan African forebears? The indirect evidence says yes. Later skulls from early Upper Paleolithic China, such as that from Zhoukoudian, have strong affinities with sub-Saharan reference populations. In an article concerning the first Americans, we are told, the crania of the earliest Americans, earlier than around 10 Ka, have been referred to as the Paleo-Americans. These tend to be similar to those of extant Australians, Melanesians, and sub-Saharan Africans. Like the late Pleistocene specimen from Zhoukoudian Upper Cave, skull 10-1. Indeed, they exhibit a dolichocephalic morphology, prognathic and low faces, with relatively low, broad orbits and noses. Homo sapiens in the Americas, Overview of the Earliest Human Expansion in the New World, by Aurelio Marangoni, David Caramelli, Giorgio Manzi, in Journal of Anthropological Sciences, Volume 92, 2014, page 86. The craniofacial traits just described are common amongst sub-Saharan populations and are evidence of tropical adaptation. Dolichocephaly refers to long, narrow skulls. These are ideal in hot climates because more cylindrical-shaped skulls cool faster than more globular-shaped skulls. Broad noses are characteristic of hot, humid environments, like those found in the tropics. This is because the nose adds heat and moisture to the air as it is breathed in. A high, long nose has the opportunity to add more heat and moisture to inhaled air. Such a characteristic would be useful in either arid or cold conditions. A short, broad nose adds little heat and moisture to inhaled air. Low faces and low, broad orbits are partly collateral effects of low, broad noses, and therefore suggest humid heat environment. The EUP skull from Zhoukoudian, China, has tropical adaptations, even though this part of China is far from the tropics. Genetic evidence for Asian origins. Daoshan and Laos, 80 to 60,000 YA, where the oldest evidence of AMH has been found in East Asia, are in the more southern parts. Zhoukoudian, where the more recent 30,000 to 20,000 YA AMH have been found, is more northerly. These three fossils imply a south-north direction of movement in the colonization of East Asia. Genetic studies have implied the same. On the basis of the genetic evidence generated so far, particularly from Y chromosome data, CAS researchers recently discovered that early modern humans entered the region from its southern part, and then they made a northward migration about 25,000 to 30,000 years ago. A recent study made by a research team headed by Professor Su Bing from the CAS Kunming Institute of Zoology, KIZ, has shed new light on the issue. As reported in July 14 issue of the American Journal of Human Genetics, their study shows that the Y chromosome haplogroup specific to East Asians is more diverse in the southern population than their northern cousins, and the southern population is found to have their own specific haplogroups, while only part of East Asian specific haplogroups exist in the northern populations. In other words, the earliest inhabitants in the Orient had been the southern population, originating from East Africa, and then they migrated north. Scientists find genetic evidence for southern origin of modern humans in East Asia. Phys.org, July 27, 2005. The genetic evidence clearly points to a south-north migration to populate East Asia, which is what we would expect if the first AMH to enter Asia were sub-Saharans. This is because Africans would be more likely to maintain subtropical latitude in their migration across Asia until they reach the end of southern Asia and are forced to move north. Conclusion. The oldest Asian AMH date back to 100,000 to 90,000 YA and have some archaic features. They are from Skul and Kafsa in Israel. While they are widely thought to have died out, they may be connected to AMH teeth found in Daoshan, China, dating back 80,000 years. In Israel and Laos, AMH skulls around 60,000 years old have been found. In Zhoukoudian, an AMH skull was found that was 30,000 to 20,000 YO. They had sub-Saharan craniofacial affinities. The simplest interpretation is that AMH spread from sub-Saharan Africa into southern West Asia and continued along a southern latitude into East Asia. Having reached the end of southern Asia around 30,000 years ago, they headed as far north as Zhoukoudian. The Y chromosome genetic studies have confirmed the southern origin of northern East Asian populations, thus confirming the archaeological record. Up until 20,000 years ago, all skulls found in Asia had sub-Saharan affinities. It raises the obvious question: when did the populations of current Asiatic appearance become dominant in Asia? This shall be answered in Chapter 6. Chapter 5. The First Europeans. Europe would appear to be the last continent in the Old World to be populated by Homo sapiens sapiens. It has, however, had the benefit of the most intense and longest archaeological excavation of any continent. As a result, there are more EUP skeletal remains from this continent than any other. Hofmeyr skull. Our first hint that the earliest Europeans did not resemble the common textbook illustrations of cavemen comes from a description of a skull found in South Africa. We have dated a skull from Hofmeyr, South Africa, to 36.2 plus or minus 3.3 thousand years ago through a combination of optically stimulated luminescence and uranium series dating methods. The skull is morphologically modern overall, but displays some archaic features. Its strongest morphometric affinities are with Upper Paleolithic (UP) Eurasians, rather than recent, geographically proximate people. The Hofmeyr cranium is consistent with the hypothesis that UP Eurasians descended from a population that emigrated from sub-Saharan Africa in the late Pleistocene. Late Pleistocene human skull from Hofmeyr, South Africa, and Modern Human Origins, by F.E. Grein et al. In Science, Volume 315, 5809, January 2007, page 226. Wassay skull. The oldest AMH skull from Europe is 37,000 YO, a similar age to the Hofmeyr skull. It was discovered at Peștera cu Wassay in Romania. The recent discovery of a jaw and a skull belonging to the earliest known modern humans to set foot in Europe is rewriting the story of our evolution. Professors Erich Trinkaus and João Zilhau, two scholars of human evolution, have been investigating the material found deep within a cave in the Romanian Carpathian Mountains. Wassay Cave, the discovery of Europe's oldest modern humans, by Erich Trinkaus and João Zilhau in Current World Archaeology, number 24, August 2007. A reconstruction of the Wassay Cave skull was conducted showing not just a sub-Saharan looking individual, but one who resembled the Khoisan in their appearance. We are told of the reconstruction. His recreation offers a tantalizing glimpse into life before the dawn of civilization. It also shows the close links between the first European settlers and their immediate African ancestors. To sculpt the head, Mr. Neve called on his years of experience recreating the appearance of murder victims, as well as using careful measurements of bone. It was made for the BBC Two series, The Incredible Human Journey. This will follow the evolution of humans from the cradle of Africa to the waves of migrations that saw Homo sapiens colonize the globe. The first European, created from fragments of fossil, the face of our forebears 35,000 years ago, by David Derbyshire. It is no wonder that an EUP skull from South Africa resembles the earliest EUP skull from Europe. Kostenki 14, almost contemporaneous with Wassay man, was a fossil from the Western Russian site of Kostenki. It turned out to be around 36,000 YO. More questions, which have still not been finally answered, were raised by the find of a skeleton, almost perfectly preserved, in the cultural layer of Kostenki 14 site. The exceptional prognathism and enormous breadth of the piriform opening set the skull apart from all the other Paleolithic skulls of Europe, and call to mind the craniological traits of the Negroid race. The reconstruction of the face from the skull is highly reminiscent of the modern Papuan, person of New Guinea, the territory of the former USSR during the Upper Paleolithic, by Valery P. Alexeyev in History of Humanity, Prehistory and the Beginning of Civilization, edited by Siegfried J. Dillette, Taylor and Francis, 1994, page 225. It is interesting that both these extremely ancient skulls were found in the eastern part of Europe. This is precisely where we would expect to find the oldest modern human fossils if they entered from West Asia. Cro-Magnon skull. The oldest AMH found in Western Europe are a little younger, implying an east to west populating of the continent. One of the oldest skulls found in the West is identified as the 32,000-year-old skeletons from the famous site of Cro-Magnon in southwest France. Wassay Cave, the discovery of Europe's oldest modern humans, by Erich Trinkaus and João Zilhau in Current World Archaeology, number 24. He was popularized amongst those of African descent by Professor Diop. According to Diop, Cro-Magnon man was the ancestor of those of modern European appearance. Judging by the reconstruction of Cro-Magnon, he did indeed look somewhat like today's Europeans. But there is more. In the last chapter, we cited Professor Chris Stringer, the current head of human origins at the Natural History Museum, London. He wrote a paper that appeared in 1992 called Reconstructing Recent Human Evolution. Part of the purpose of the paper was to compare EUP European skulls with modern populations from around the world to assess their affinities in the light of the competing models of modern human origins. He used two computer programs to assist in this endeavor. One was designed by W. Howells, one of the most well-known physical anthropologists of the time. The other was called Crane ID, developed by Professor Richard Wright of the University of Sydney. He revealed the results for the affinities of Cro-Magnon as Cro-Magnon 1 Europe is Australian by Crane ID, but African by Howells. So, according to objective anatomical measurements, as Stringer calls them, Cro-Magnon man was not of European appearance, but of African or Australian appearance. Perhaps the hair on the reconstruction should be modified to fit this information. Fari Supia, who we quoted earlier, wrote to Professor Stringer. He asked for the measurements of the Cro-Magnon skull. Stringer had taken these measurements in the early 1970s as part of his PhD studies. Stringer kindly sent Supia the measurements, and he entered them into the Crane ID2 computer program. Crane ID compares 29 skull measurements of the specimen with those of thousands of other skulls from the different regions of the world. It uses a database developed by W. Howells. It picks out the 50 closest skulls according to those measurements. The specific results of Cro-Magnon by Crane ID2 were 23 Bushmen, 15 European, 6 Sub-Saharan, 3 SWP, Southwest Pacific. This European EUP AMH also has a clear South African affinity. It suggests that many of these early humans had a Khoisan look to them. It is not surprising that there is a secondary affinity with Europeans, given that this population had been located in Europe for thousands of years. The adaptations to the cold climate were taking place, but the African affinity was still dominant. In fact, all European AMH have some characters that are common in present-day Europeans, but are not common in present-day Sub-Saharans. High nasal bones would be one example of this. Grotte des Enfants 5 and 6. In northwest Italy, bordering on France, is the Barma Grande cave. The cave is also known as Grotte des Enfants, or Cave of the Children. This was the site of some important discoveries, including skeletons, sculptures, and other cultural artifacts. An encyclopedia on human evolution reveals the following about the site. The older skeletons, Grotte des Enfants 5 and 6, are presumed to be C24Ka, based on direct dating of remains from Arène Candide and Barma Grande. The second group of 3 are from the Gravettian layers, layer F, and consist of 2 males and 1 female. Ochre and marine shell ornaments were found decorating the burials. Berneu, 1906, and later Boule and Valois, 1957, thought Gravettian remains Grotte des Enfants 5 and 6 to be Negroid in character. Boule and Valois, 1957, elaborate on this and stated that the Grotte des Enfants remains display affinities of South African Bushmen, finding similarities with the skeleton of the Hottentot Venus. Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Human Evolution, edited by Bernard Wood, Blackwell Publishing, 2011, entry G, no page number given for ebook. Gravettian refers to the culture of these mid-upper Paleolithic Europeans from France to Russia. The reconstruction of the adolescent male from Barma Grande has obvious sub-Saharan affinities. The skeletons have Khoisan affinities that were remarked on by Boule and Valois. Professor Diop argued that this fossil, of obvious African type, was the oldest of the European modern EUP fossils, but we now know the Barma Grande or Grimaldi skeletons date to after Wasse, Kostenki, and Cro-Magnon. The Barma Grande reconstruction holds a statuette in his left hand. This is because there are a number of statuettes that were found at the site. Most did not have facial features, but one did. Of it, we are told, the so-called Negroid head, made of green steatite, 24 millimeters high, from the Grimaldi series of figurines found in rock shelters along a cliff on the Mediterranean shore of Italy. It is particularly in the details of the hairstyle and in the similarities of hairstyle amongst the figurines from Losel, Brasempouy, and later Willendorf that authors beginning with Piet, for example 1895, inferred a Negroid population at Grimaldi. Mobilizing ideologies, Paleolithic art, gender trouble and thinking about alternatives, by Margaret Conkey in Women in Human Evolution, edited by Laurie Hager, Routledge, 1997, ebook 2004, page 191. Examples of figurines from this period that can be seen are Venus de Lespugue from the caves of Lespugue in the Pyrenees, France. The Venuses of Brasempouy, France, Willendorf, Austria, and Kostenki, Russia, show the kind of hair the first AMH people in Europe were familiar with. Reconstructing artists are unfamiliar with the massive amount of evidence for a sub-Saharan origin for EUP Europeans. As a result, they have drawn the patterns on top of the heads of the statuettes as head covers rather than hair. Similar patterns on top of the head, representing hair, can be seen in ancient Egyptian and other African art. Also from around 24,000 years ago are the skeletal remains of children from the site of Sungir in Russia. It is around 200 kilometers east of Moscow. They belong to the same culture as the Barma Grande people. The Sungir 2 and 3 late juvenile to early adolescent immature skeletons from the Middle Upper Paleolithic Eastern Gravettian of northern Russia. Developmental stress and survival among the mid-upper Paleolithic Sungir children, dental enamel hypoplasias of Sungir 2 and 3 by D. Guatelli Steinberg, A. P. Bujilova, and E. Trinkhaus in International Journal of Osteoarchaeology, Volume 23, 4, page 421. Sungir 2 was the skull of a 12 to 13-year-old boy, which was used to make a reconstruction. The general shape of the face is reminiscent of sub-Saharans, a partial result of pronounced alveolar prognathism. Again, the hair of the reconstruction does not suit the face. The skulls and sculptures of EUP Europeans resemble sub-Saharans in facial shape, features, and hair. This is what we would expect of modern humans with an African origin. Limb proportions. Our limbs come in two parts, proximal, or closer segments, and distal, or further away segments. In populations that evolved in tropical, subtropical climates, the distal limb segments tend to be longer in proportion to the proximal segments. This produces a high ratio, or index, when the two are compared. In populations evolved in temperate climates, the index is lower. General sub-Saharans and Australians had the highest indices, followed by African Americans, Melanesians, ancient Egyptians, and Khoisan. Europeans had lower indices, while East Asians and Inuits had the lowest. Europe is fortunate in having better preserved EUP post-cranial skeletal remains than any other continent, owing to the climate and intensity of archaeological excavation. We earlier cited Professor Eric Trinkhaus from the University of New Mexico, who studied the oldest skull from Europe. In 1981, he conducted a study comparing the distal limb proportions of EUP Europeans with those of populations from different regions of the world. He published the results in 1981. The limb segment proportions of European EUP AMH resembled those of African Americans, Melanesians, ancient Egyptians, and Bushmen. This made it more likely that European EUP moderns evolved in the tropical, subtropical zones and did not originate in Europe. In the 1990s, Trenton Holliday was a PhD student under Trinkhaus. He followed up on the work of Trinkhaus, but included more measurements in his study. He applied his research to the different models of human origins in Europe. These models were replacement, championed by Professor Chris Stringer, and regional continuity, championed by Professor Milford Walpoff. The abstract of his paper reads as follows. Body proportions co-vary with climate, apparently as the result of climatic selection. Ontogenetic research and migrant studies have demonstrated that body proportions are largely genetically controlled and are under low selective rates. Thus, studies of body form can provide evidence for evolutionarily short-term dispersals and/or gene flow. Following these observations, competing models of modern human origins yield different predictions concerning body proportion shifts in late Pleistocene Europe. Replacement predicts that the earliest modern Europeans will possess tropical body proportions, assuming Africa is the center of origin, while regional continuity permits only minor shifts in body shape due to climatic change and/or improved cultural buffering. This study tests these predictions via analyses of osteometric data reflective of trunk height and breadth, limb proportions, and relative body mass for samples of early Upper Paleolithic, EUP, late Upper Paleolithic, LUP, and Meso.
Yeah, if y'all ever notice, it's like I could be doing fine until I start showing my face, and then I start stuttering and stuff. Because getting tongue tied because I've always been shy like that. I've always been real shy and timid somewhat. And then I had things that happened to me, during childhood that my parents didn't know about. And I've just recently started opening up about a lot of this stuff, after I started healing and stuff. Because we always have to continue to work on ourselves, to try to get over those childhood traumas and forgive those who did that to us. And forgive ourselves because so many years I blamed myself for some things, And I had to realize that I was just a child. Then I could, it was done to me, and I couldn't defend myself from grown men and stuff like that. So if it wasn't for Information Man, I probably wouldn't have never started. Well, I had the channel because you have to have a channel, to view videos and stuff on YouTube. But if it hadn't been for him, I never would have started trying to grow my platform. He gave me the ambition, to try to come out of my shyness a little bit and start, spreading my wings like I'm doing now. That's why I like to give him so much thanks, and I respect him so much because. Like I said, if it was with him, I would have never took these steps that I'm taking now to try to shine my light, to the world. So big ups to Information Man. If y'all not subscribed to him, subscribe to him. He has 3 platforms here on YouTube. Information Man Show, Information Man Speaks Podcast, and Infomedia Live. Now, Infomedia Live is the platform that he helps us new content creators or existing content creators, any content creator, he helps us to improve our channels by giving us tips and everything to help us grow. So much love to you, Info Man. Peace and blessings and much respect. And he was the one that kind of gave me, he always said, if you're kind of shy, he was the one that gave me the idea of starting using the avatars more, that's why I use avatars most of the time. Because I can really find my voice when I'm not, personally in front of the camera. So it's nothing against anybody. If y'all feel like I, don't talk to y'all that much or somewhat kind of maybe cut you short, it's not you all. It's just that I'm like that. I've never been a real big talker, to people because I've always been a person that stayed by myself, and I never was one to spread my business, but I know that the things that I talk about now are things that help me heal because of the circumstances that I've been in different relationships and things that went on through my childhood and as an adult. And I realized that these were things that needed to happen in order to help me heal to get me to where I am now in life. So much love to you all.
MES, humans, and 13 recent African and European populations. Results reveal a clear tendency for the EUP sample to cluster with recent Africans, while LUP and MES samples cluster with recent Europeans. These results refute the hypothesis of local continuity in Europe and are consistent with an interpretation of elevated gene flow and population dispersal from Africa, followed by subsequent climatic adaptation to colder conditions. These data do not, however, preclude the possibility of some, albeit small, contribution of genes from Neanderthals to succeeding populations, as is postulated in Brouwer's Afro-European sapiens model. Body Proportions in Late Pleistocene Europe and Modern Human Origins by Trenton Holliday in Journal of Human Evolution, Volume 32, 5, 1997, page 423. The Khoisan character of the distal limb segments of the European EUP-AMH suggests a sub-Saharan origin for their ancestors. No study to date has contradicted this evidence. The thoroughness of this study is shown by the last sentence. Holliday makes it clear small contributions of Neanderthal genes to the modern European gene pool are not precluded by the results of the study. It shows that he gave careful consideration to different interpretations of his results. We now know that there was a minor Neanderthal contribution. Conclusion. The various fossils of modern humans from the EUP show mainly African and Australo-Melanesian associations in their craniofacial traits. This is consistent with a sub-Saharan origin for European EUP-AMH. Some also show specific affinities with the Khoisan. The limb segment ratios of EUP moderns from Europe show the same extent of tropical adaptation as the remains of the Khoisan from recent times. The sculptures created by EUP moderns in Europe usually show nothing distinctive, but when they do, it is facial features and angles that are common amongst sub-Saharans. The sculptures are exclusively female and show steatopygia, as is common amongst Khoisan females. The first Europeans were undoubtedly of sub-Saharan origin. The question that then arises is how and when was European appearance derived from African appearance? Chapter 6. From African to Non-African Appearance. Introduction. Professor Diop theorized that the origin of European appearance lay in the adaptation of EUP African immigrants to an Ice Age Europe. He had correctly assessed the African affinities of the first European modern humans. According to him, however, the first evidence of European appearance was Cro-Magnon man. It now turns out that Cro-Magnon man had Bushman affinities and cannot be defined as being of European appearance. The question of when European appearance arose and why thus continues. The skeletal remains from 36,000 to 24,000 years ago all show tropical, subtropical adaptation, if not in their craniofacial traits, then in their limb segment proportions. We also highlighted a genetic study in Chapter 1, which gave the origins of the modern European population at 6,500 years ago. None of this is consistent with the conclusions of Professor Diop on the emergence of European appearance. The importance of vitamin D. The initial theory regarding the evolution of white skin involved the need to more efficiently produce vitamin D. The consensus among scientists has always been that lower levels of vitamin D at higher latitudes, where the sun is less intense, caused the lightening effect when modern humans who began darker skin first migrated north. Why did people become white? By Heather Witt, September 2009, Live Science. Scientists at the University of Oslo theorized that the switch from hunter-gathering to agriculture removed foods rich in vitamin D from the diet of the early Europeans. They adapted by developing pale skins. They also explain in the report that when agriculture developed in tropical and subtropical areas, the practitioners did not develop pale skin. Presumably, the amount of sunlight at these latitudes provided enough vitamin D for the adaptation to be unnecessary. We do not agree with the agricultural theory. We also think one of the reasons why agriculture is suspected as the culprit is because the change to white skin, of which more later, has been shown to have happened after the Ice Age. The advantage of light skin lies in the amount of time it takes to produce the necessary amount of vitamin D. Children with fair skins are able to get their daily dose of vitamin D with just 10 to 20 minutes in the sun. But research has shown that sun-protective skin pigments in black children means that it takes up to 4 times as long for the skin to produce enough of the vitamin. White Europeans only evolved 5,500 years ago after food habits changed, by Daily Mail reporter, not named. Vitamin D is required for healthy bone development, but is also involved in the immune system. More in Chapter 8. Having enough in childhood and adulthood is crucial for healthy bones and immune system. We also have to remember that not all sunlight makes vitamin D in the skin. The angle of sunlight has to be strong enough to make the vitamin. In places further than 37 degrees north, the angle will be too weak for the vitamin to be made during the winter months. All of Europe is above 37 degrees north. See Harvard Health Publications in search of vitamin D. EUP Europe was in the middle of an ice age, or as the climatologists like to call it, a glacial maximum. An ice age is caused by the Earth being slightly further away from the sun and the tilts of the poles away from the sun being sharper. As a result, in an ice age, average temperatures are lower and the angle of sunlight is weaker. This means vitamin D making levels of sunlight are less common than usual. Vitamin D can also be accessed through diet, but food variety becomes more limited during an ice age. Every minute of vitamin D making levels of sunlight you could capture is going to be crucial. Those that need less time to make vitamin D, lighter people, are going to be at an advantage to those that need more time, darker people. From what we are about to read, however, it becomes clear that the skin of Ice Age Europeans did not turn white. It is reasonable to assume the lighter end of the Khoisan complexion spectrum is what most Europeans looked like by the end of the Ice Age. The genes for white skin. From a genetic point of view, how precisely did the change from African complexion to European complexion come about? The research of Carlos Lalueza Fox and others contributes towards answering this question. When it comes to skin color, the team found a patchwork of evolution in different places and 3 separate genes that produce light skin, telling a complex story for how European skin evolved to be much lighter during the past 8,000 years. The modern humans who came out of Africa to originally settle Europe about 40,000 years ago are presumed to have had dark skin, which is advantageous in sunny latitudes. And the new data confirm that about 8,500 years ago, early hunter-gatherers in Spain, Luxembourg, and Hungary also had darker skin. They lacked versions of 2 genes, SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, that lead to depigmentation and therefore pale skin in Europeans today. But in the far north, where low light levels would favor pale skin, the team found a different picture in hunter-gatherers. 7 people from the 7,700-year-old Motala archaeological site in southern Sweden had both light skin gene variants, SLC24A5 and SLC45A2. They also had a third gene, HERC2-OCA2, which causes blue eyes and may also contribute to light skin and blonde hair. Thus, ancient hunter-gatherers of the far north were already pale and blue-eyed, but those of Central and Southern Europe had darker skin. How Europeans Evolved White Skin by Anne Gibbons, Science Magazine. Lalueza Fox informed the journalist that not only were Europeans 10,000 years ago lacking in both genes for pale skin, but they had an unusual accompanying trait. When Lalueza Fox looked at the genome, he found that rather than having light skin, the man had gene variants that tend to produce much darker skin. This guy had to be darker than any modern European, but we don't know how dark, the scientist said. Another surprise finding was that the man had blue eyes. That was unexpected, said Lalueza Fox, because the mutation for blue eyes was thought to have arisen more recently than the mutations that cause lighter skin color. The results suggest that the blue eye color came first in Europe, with the transition to lighter skin ongoing through Mesolithic times. On top of the scientific impact, artists might have to rethink their drawings of the people. You see a lot of reconstructions of these people hunting and gathering, and they look like modern Europeans with light skin. You never see a reconstruction of a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer with dark skin and blue eye color, Lalueza Fox said. Details of the study are published in the journal Nature. Swarthy blue-eyed cavemen revealed using DNA from ancient tooth by Ian Sample, The Guardian. Lalweza Fox said, "We don't know how dark, but we have presented evidence showing Khoisan affinities of the EUP Europeans. They were the ancestors of the European hunter-gatherers of 8500 YA. It is highly likely that their complexion was that of the lighter individuals amongst the Khoisan." To date, no realistic reconstruction has been produced of these Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. The drawings that accompanied the article were themselves the same complexion as modern Europeans of Mediterranean origin. Frost theory on hair form and sexual selection. If the original modern humans came from sub-Saharan Africa, it logically follows that they had tightly curled hair. When they spread to Asia and Europe, they would still have had this hair texture. Only after thousands of years would the change in appearance from sub-Saharan to European and East Asian have come about. A summary of the development of straight hair is given by Peter Frost, an anthropologist whose views can only be described as being much to the right of anyone mainstream. See www.unz.com for confirmation. In theory, one's politics need not interfere with their theories, but in practice, we do not think this is true of anyone, including the present author. As he is one of a very few people to give a detailed outline of how straight hair evolved, we have no problem presenting his theory. Evidence presented by anyone of any political persuasion, however, should be rigorously assessed. If this is done, the politics of the individual will not be a factor, because if their views influence their evidence or its interpretation, this will be detected. Frost believes the changes took place in northern Eurasia, and that there was an Ice Age-related geographical barrier separating the western section, where people of European appearance developed, and the eastern section, where people of East Asian appearance developed. We present a summary of his theory and include our own comments on each point in bold and square brackets. 1. Sub-Saharan babies are born with hair of silky texture. The tightly curled hair only grows after early infancy. This is a fact. 2. The tightly curled hair of sub-Saharan adults can, in documented cases, revert to a curly, silky form when suffering from diseases of the immune system, such as lupus. A useful fact not commonly known. 3. When humans left Africa, an adaptation appeared amongst them at some point where they retained infantile hair form into adulthood. We think this is good reasoning and may hold the key to differences in hair texture in humans. 4. Frost cites studies that have found males favored females with infantile features. It makes sense that adult humans are hardwired to protect infants and will feel the same way towards those females with infantile features, but it does not necessarily follow that this is what happened. 5. Such infantile traits include lighter complexions, less prognathic faces, and silkier hair texture. While these are indeed infantile traits, so are broader, shorter noses, and yet Frost does not explain why this feature was not selected for amongst northern Eurasians. 6. Those females in northern Eurasia that had the infantile hair on their heads were selected ahead of those that did not. This happened because of sexual preference rather than any advantage that it gave to the individual's survival. Here we take issue with Frost, because it is far from clear whether our sexual preferences are not themselves influenced by the environment. This is speculative, but it could be that cold weather or lack of sunlight triggers light skin preference, or that for silky hair in a population. 7. Over several generations, the preference meant everyone became of this hair type. 8. The selection was then for those females whose head hair was longer. He likens this to the preference for larger crests in life forms that have crests on the top of their heads. This accentuated those traits within the Eurasian population. Gradually, hair became longer and straighter, particularly amongst females. Eurasian females do indeed have slightly longer, thicker hair than Eurasian men, and Frost provides both reasoning and citations. According to Frost, while this was taking place, a significant change in sex reliance was occurring, which impacted the outcome. 1. In the tropics, biodiversity is high, while it is lower in Arctic tundra environments, like Ice Age northern Eurasia. Makes sense. 2. In Africa and the tropics, subtropics, females had plenty to forage because of high biodiversity, but in northern Eurasia, there was significantly less. Makes sense? The Ice Age would have made foraging even more difficult with the ground covered by several feet of snow for much of the year. 3. The percentage of sustenance provided by females decreased significantly in northern Eurasia in comparison to Africa and the tropics, subtropics. Makes sense and explains the origins of male domination in later Eurasian cultures. We do, however, wonder whether this happened after the EUP period, because the statuettes suggest females were still held in high esteem. 4. At the same time, men in northern Eurasia had to increase their area of hunting because of lower levels of biodiversity. Longer hunts incur higher casualties. Makes sense? 5. In the tropics, men could get away with a failed hunt because females had a larger contribution to sustenance. In northern Eurasia, where men were the primary providers of sustenance, there was increased pressure of having to return with a kill. Amongst Inuits in the Arctic region, food came almost entirely from meat. Men took more risks while hunting, and this increased the male mortality rate. Men would either get meat or die trying. Makes sense and well reasoned. 6. This resulted in fewer males and more females. At the same time, food was not in great supply. 7. The best hunters had many women to choose from, but could only support 2 or 3 spouses. Ordinary hunters could only support 1 spouse. The competition amongst women for a mate was high. 8. Of those women that got to reproduce, there was a disproportionate amount of lighter-skinned, more silkier-haired, less pragmatic-faced individuals. Again, there may have been climate-induced factors favoring the selection of those traits in northern Eurasia. Also, the adaptive values of those traits make it likely nature favored their selection. 9. Mutations for bright hair colors and bright eyes increased the likelihood of sexual selection in females, so blonde red hair and blue-green eyes spread in the population. Parallels for bright colors and sexual choice can be found in the animal kingdom. The Evolution of Long Head Hair in Humans by Peter Frost in Advances in Anthropology, Volume 5, 2015, page 274. The Puzzle of European Hair, Eye, and Skin Color by Peter Frost in Advances in Anthropology, Volume 4, 2014, page 79. Frost favors sexual selection over natural selection for the development of European physical traits, partly because white skin has been shown to have evolved after the last ice age. We will show, however, that this is unlikely for the accessory traits that come with a non-African appearance. Our theory of the origins of non-African appearance. Based on Frost's outlined theory, we will present our own ideas about what actually happened. It will heavily rely on the scientific paper 8,000 Years of Natural Selection in Europe, presented at the 84th Annual Meeting of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists. Matheson et al., 2015. It will also include what is known about the distribution of hair types in Africa and the EUP European cultures. 1. The initial infantile hair retention mutation may have taken place in the Horn of Africa, which would be an alternative explanation to back migration for why hair textures are silkier in this region. In Somalia, the hair type of many individuals is quite reminiscent of African baby hair. 2. Of the small bands that left East Africa, some had mainly tightly curled hair, while others were mainly infantile hair. It is unlikely that any group had one exclusive hair type. Supporting evidence is that the Andaman Islanders have both tightly curled and smooth curly hair amongst them, but the former predominates. They have survived isolated for tens of thousands of years, as their coal complexions bear witness. Their faces are also reminiscent of European, Sub-Saharan, and East Asian appearance, suggesting that the first people had different facial kinds of features amongst them, sometimes referred to as racially undifferentiated. 3. Amongst those that left the tropics and ended up in northern Eurasia, both long and shorter Afro types of hair could be found as evidenced by the long hair on some EUP statuettes. 4. Individuals with hair covering the back of the neck were favored by nature over those who did not in the conditions of Ice Age Northern Eurasia. It may seem like a small advantage, but it may be the difference between recovery from hyperthermia and death from it. Survival is often determined by small margins. 5. Eventually, such individuals were the overwhelming majority. The trait was accentuated through same trait breeding, and hair became longer and straighter. 6. Those with smaller facial areas were naturally selected for because of decreased heat loss from the head, lips, nose breadth, and jaw size. The degree to which the reduction took place differed amongst Western and Eastern Eurasians, but they both underwent reduction, in comparison to those who remained in the tropical and tropical. 7. The same principle was responsible for a reduction in the gluteus region, below the back, decreasing the area from which heat could be lost. It could hardly be sexual selection, because the EUP statuettes show a favoring of the fuller gluteus maximus. The tendency for having a slighter gluteus area is found amongst the descendants of those from both Western and Eastern sections of Northern Eurasia. 8. Individuals with shorter limbs and lower limb segment proportions were favored by natural selection because of the same principle: less surface area for heat loss. In Trenton Holliday's paper, Chapter 5, aspects of European limb proportions had become cold adapted by 10,000 years ago. 9. In the eastern section, there were also high-speed winds, which favored those with epicanthic folds and facial flatness. Presumably, the fold protects the eyes from high-speed winds. This could have been the difference between keeping one's sight and losing it. Those in the population who had this trait had an adaptive and reproductive advantage over those who did not. 10. At the end of the Ice Age, 11,000 years ago, both eastern and western sections were still within the Khoisan range of complexion, despite having undergone some cold adaptations. The Ice Age-related geographical barrier between the sections vanished, and the groups intermingled in Central Asia. 11. Around 9000 YA, the gene SLC24A5 emerged, which made the bearer 32.5% lighter than sub-Saharans. This is equivalent to a darker biracial complexion. We suspect this arose in Central Asia, which would account for the later spread of this complexion to Northern Europe, Anatolia, and East Asia. 12. Some hunter-gatherers with a high frequency of this gene migrated from Western Central Asia to Anatolia, modern Turkey, around 8,500 YA. Others migrated to Northern European regions like Scandinavia. Others from Eastern Central Asia went to East Asia and may have been the ancestors of darker Southeast Asians. This would explain the presence of EDAR gene in both Mesolithic Scandinavia and East Asia. Matheson et al. 2015 abstract. 13. When agriculture developed in Turkey and Syria, those with a very high frequency of the SLC24A5 gene carried agriculture into Europe from the southeast. This was around 7,800 YA. In areas of European Neolithic culture, 90% of the skeletons had this gene. Agriculture could not have been responsible for white skin because those practicing it only had one of the skin lightening genes. 14. At this point, 7,800 YA, there were two general European complexions outside of the north, one within the Khoisan range, prevalent among the blue-eyed hunter-gatherers of the Central and Southern Europe, and the other resembling darker biracial individuals, prevalent amongst the dark-eyed Neolithic Southeasterners who were gradually spreading. 15. Around 8,000 YA, a second light-skin gene emerges, SLC45A2, presumably amongst those Northern Europeans who already had the first skin-lightening gene. It was responsible for a further 60% reduction in skin pigmentation. The individuals with both skin-lightening genes were 92.5% lighter than sub-Saharans. These were the first complexions of modern European range. The genes are first detected in southern Scandinavia, 7,700 YA. but an origin in Central Asia would explain the presence of pale skin in both Northern Europe and Northeast Asia. 16. From 5800 YA, white skin becomes more common in Central and Southern Europe. 17. A migration of the pastoralist Yamnaya culture from the Russian steppes around 4800 YA brought tall individuals with both skin-lightening genes to Europe. They were militaristic and replaced significant sections of the previous populations. We are tempted to link this with the spread of Indo-European languages. 18. White skin became ubiquitous in every part of Europe.
That's what you did. Drop in, then drop out.
With the exception of Spain, where it only predominates, although the present author has seen a few Romanian individuals who look like they only have SLC24A5, the Neolithic gene. One can assume a similar situation was taking place in East Asia. 19. Presumably, the range in complexion amongst Europeans is down to the mixing of those with only SLC24A5 with those that had both skin-lightening genes. 19th century writers, such as David McRitchie, noticed that there were two types of Europeans: Melanochroi, dark white people, and Xanthaxroi, pale white people. They theorized that Melanochroi were descended from an even darker type with long hair, who we now know to be those with one gene, mixed with pale whites. We could say McRitchie anticipated these discoveries. Why the light-skinned genes did remarkably well in spreading and became almost exclusive in Europe and East Asia is likely to be down to the military nature of the societies where pale skin arose and the height of the population. The Yamnaya pastoralist culture would be a good example of this. Matheson et al., 2015, says they were responsible for bringing tall genes to Europe. There is a good deal of population replacement involved in the spreading of light-skinned genes, which is in keeping with the military explanation. Back migration. Once the people with paler complexions and long hair had emerged, they appear to have spread quite rapidly, given that the pale in a row only around 8 YA. By 4000 YA, they had covered most of Europe. They were also spreading in East Asia and South China. By 2000 YA, they were more or less the exclusive population of Europe. Only a few pockets in coastal Northern Europe and Britain remained of the old people. At this date, the same process was beginning in Southeast Asia. This can be concluded from a number of different and unrelated sources. Frost himself says, long head hair is the derived form. It evolved in humans whose ancestors left Africa some 60,000 years ago, particularly in those groups that are native to Northern Eurasia, or were initially, and then back migrated to the tropics, such as the Austronesians in Southeast Asia and Oceania, and the Amerindians in the tropical New World. The Evolution of Long Head Hair in Humans, by Peter Frost, in Advances in Anthropology 5, 2015, page 275. The back migrations also reached subtropical West Asia and East and North Africa. The confusing element is that there was probably also a back migration of an African complexioned long-haired element into East and North Africa. Concerning what we are about to read, it is not clear whether it represents a pale or dark Eurasian back migration. A skeleton was recovered from Mota, Ethiopia, dating back to 2500 BC. It was analyzed by Dr. Andrea Manica of Cambridge University. They looked at the entire genome of Mota man and concluded that he had purely African DNA. We are also informed of what African DNA looked like several
Naps, what to do? Drop in and then drop back out.
centuries after this. But the comparison of this with modern African genomes highlighted that about 1,500 years after his death, the makeup of the continent had changed. Quite remarkably, we see in Ethiopia about 20%, so a fifth, of the genome of people living there right now is actually of Eurasian origin. It actually comes from these farmers, explained Dr. Manica. But it goes further than that. Because if you go to the corners of Africa, all the way to West Africa or South Africa, even populations that we really thought were purely African have 5 to 6% of their genome that dates back to these Western Eurasian farmers. Ancient DNA Reveals Into Africa Migration by Rebecca Morell, October 2015, BBC News. In Chapter 1, we observed that the hair textures of Africans from different parts of the Sub-Sahara.
Well, see, I know Naps have a pretty large platform, so he be busy working on his content too. So, I mean, I don't really fault him for that. There you go, right there. I knew he was gonna come. He be in the background listening. I know my boo-boo. How you doing today, love? How you like this this presentation that I got going on now? What's your I like to have y'all opinions on things, my inspirations, you an information man.
Suggested that a long-haired population with heavily pigmented skin had entered the Horn of Africa from Asia. Such populations can still be found in the remote areas of southern Arabia. It is highly unlikely that at some point they did not cross into the Horn from so close a distance. Their descendants then entered the rest of the Sub-Sahara from the Horn. It is not clear whether the detected back migration above was the same event. What is clear is that both North Africa and the Horn experienced significant later back migration from pale Eurasians, probably in the AD period. The variation in complexion amongst the indigenous in these two African regions is consistent with intermixing with pale.
Me either. Not see, I told you I have I buy all these audio books that I present to y'all. So when I I just be sitting here when certain topics pop in my head, I start searching for things online and stuff. And then how I found this, I went and Googled this topic, and it sent me back to Audible, my app, and I was able to pull it up, listen to the sample. So okay, sound pretty good. Something that's telling the truth, not biased.
Conclusion.
Something that's backed up by scientific proof.
Genetics of the change from sub-Saharan complexion to modern European complexion is known. This process began in the last 8,000 years. There is a strong theoretical basis in deriving the reduced facial area, limb proportions length, hair length, and gluteus area in Eurasians from a reduction in surface area heat loss. This process began from the moment.
See, Gert Muller is a freelance journalist, investigator, and has been for 20 years in Southern Africa and Britain. He has been researching the history of Africans in the Asia and biblical history for just as long. He has carried out investigative research for many articles that have appeared in such worldwide publications as West Africa Magazine. He has worked with such notable journalists as Anu Bantu and such world-renowned historical authors as Robin Walker. This book represents Muller stepping out of the dark obscurity of the researcher into the daylight of authorship.
Modern humans entered northern Eurasia and was noticeable from around 20,000 years ago. By 10,000 YA, those with non-complexion cold adaptations were probably in the majority. When we combine the two, we have the emergence of the European and East Asian appearance from the sub-Saharan. The relatively late date for the emergence of paler complexions gives added credibility to the notions regarding the sub-Saharan appearance of most North African and many West Asian populations up to the second millennium BC.
This is part 3. I was gonna do a part 4, but I see we only have 25 minutes left for the entire book, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up in this session here.
Chapter 7: The Mismeasure of Man. So far, we have looked at who and where the first humans were. We have also glanced at their culture, achievements, and way of thinking. They were capable of symbolic thought from day one. They produced paintings and abstract representations. What we have not looked at is what this all means. What does it really mean for those first humans to have been our intellectual equals, and what paradigm shift does it invite? This chapter is heavily influenced by the work of Fari Supia that first appeared as the last chapter in the book When We Rule by Robin Walker. When he would tutor us, the Pomegranate authors, he would credit many of these ideas to his older brother, Stephen Supia. The Mismeasure of Man. We shall start off by quoting an excerpt from Norman Worlds and Saxon Futures, the essay by Supia that inspired this chapter. The human capacity is underestimated. It is often implicitly assumed that certain groups of people were or are less capable than others. Regular recipients of such attitudes include Africans, in particular the Khoisan, the first Australians, the Negritos of Southeast Asia, the indigenous people of Eastern South America, Amazon rainforest, and prehistoric humanity. Almost everyone takes part in this mismeasure in one way or another, including those who are already mismeasured. Supia, 2005, page 649 to 650. We would go further than Supia and say all people take part in the mismeasure in one way or another. The mismeasure of prehistoric humanity is almost a cultural pastime. Terms like Cro-Magnon are used to indicate someone of low intelligence or whose views are deemed backward. Yet, in April 2015, at the cost of £40 million, a giant replica cave of Cro-Magnon period, 32,000 YO art, was opened at Vallon-Pont d'Arc in southern France. The paintings in question are breathtakingly realistic in their magnificence.
How are you today, boo?
These African-descended Stone Age Michelangelos turned the original
You're not getting your notifications either?
caves into a prehistoric Sistine chapel of bears, rhinos, and panthers. It is they who are being insulted in this way by people who do not know the first thing about surviving outside of their concrete jungle and are incapable of painting a household cat. Today, the original cave.
This is the last. This is part 3, and this is the last part of this series, this audio book. We have about 22 minutes left on the book, so if anyone missed the rest of them, you have to go back and watch parts 1 and parts 2 to catch up on what's going on.
Caves, Grotte Chauvet, are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For info on the cave, see France creates replica cave for spectacular prehistoric art, BBC Europe. Supia did not explicitly make the connection, but there is also a link between the way prehistoric humanity is viewed as less capable and the way modern Stone Age people like the Bushmen are viewed in the same light. Supia makes the crucial observation that Stone Age people are aware of.
That's the same thing Rhonda said. Rhonda said she had me said the same thing. By the time she noticed that I'm live, it's over with. She said, but you know how YouTube do anytime you speaking some truth, YouTube try to shut you down.
1. The physical properties of the stones they use for various tasks, including density, hardness, permeability, flammability, electrostatic properties, etc. 2. When stones contain extractable minerals for which they have a use, like hematite. 3. Where such stones can be found through prospecting. This is done by observing soil.
I'm telling you, when I first really started pushing out videos, YouTube took over 30 subscribers from me, and I never got them back. That's right. I still couldn't figure that out. I said, well, it is what it is.
Life and geology. Supia does not include the fact that prehistoric people were firing their stone tools. They were doing this over clay structures to temperatures of 300 degrees Celsius, over 160,000 YA. This heat treatment makes the stone harder and more brittle, so it would chip with increased ease. The temperature for this prehistoric heat treatment is sufficient to anneal native copper, the first step to smelting metals. To anneal is to heat and hammer a naturally occurring metal into shape.
I know how you do.
Earliest fired knives improved stone toolkit by Ewan Callaway, New Scientist, 13 August 2009.
I just
Sophia
say
then
you worse than me.
explains,
That's how we
when
Southern
humans
girls
started
do it
using
too.
metals, it was these earlier prospecting skills that were used to find metal-containing ores. The other technological elements needed to work metal, such as the use of fire and the ability to build a small clay structure to use as a furnace, predated the metal-using era by tens of thousands of years. The intellectual difference between a metal-using and a stone-using community is negligible. All the elements needed to make metallurgy possible were already present in every Stone Age community. Supia, 2005, page 650 to 651. Again, we would go further and say the intellectual difference between stone and metal users is zero. Few people think of it in this way, but nothing could be more accurate. This is not about sensitivity towards modern-day Stone Age communities. It is about logic and demonstrable facts. Unfortunately, the mismeasure of such peoples leads to hostile government policies towards them and the ignoring of such measures by the rest of the world. Are some humans more evolved than others? The simple answer is no. An appropriate understanding of within-species variation would clear up the allegations of being less evolved. During our evolution, there has been an increase in skull size and a decrease in jaw size. It was once fashionable to suggest those modern human populations with bigger jaws and smaller heads on average are less evolved than those with smaller jaws and bigger skulls. The practice has not entirely died out. At first glance, it seems to agree with evolution. A little more thinking, however, exposes the fallaciousness of the argument. We therefore ask, 1. Within a single population, are those with bigger skulls more intelligent than those with smaller ones? If the answer is no, why would you expect those populations with bigger skulls on average to be more intelligent than those with smaller ones on average? The same principle applies to jaw size. 2. On the same issue, the skulls of populations that built the first civilizations, like ancient Egypt and ancient Sumer, were, on the whole, smaller skulled and more prognaathic, bigger relative jaw size, than skulls from Europe of the same period, where there were no cities at all. 3. If those populations with bigger skulls and smaller jaws on average are in positions of power today, was this the situation 4000 YA? 4. During our evolution, there has been a decrease in both body hair and the size of brow ridges. The populations with, on the whole, bigger skulls and smaller jaws also have, on the whole, more plentiful body hair and larger brow ridges. Are we to conclude this is a sign of being less evolved? Again, the simple answer is no. Interestingly, those who allege that bigger jaw and smaller skull sizes are a sign of being less evolved never mention this. 5. It is sometimes asked, by those with a slight grasp of the subject, if Africans were the first people, does that not mean they are less evolved than those who descend from them? Firstly, it was thought for decades that the first people lived 50,000 YA and were of modern European appearance. Nobody alleged that because they were first, those who came after them were more evolved. Why is this question being asked now? Secondly, the humans of 200,000 YA were as intelligent as us today, as we have just seen. Thirdly, every population continues to adapt to their environment.
That's a damn shame.
Those who went to Europe adapted to
I'm
Europe,
reading your comment,
and those who
Rhonda.
stayed in Africa continued to adapt to Africa. Allegations of anyone being less evolved are therefore not valid. Conclusion. An old teacher of mine used to say, just because something is known doesn't mean
When I
it
say
is
Clyde and
accepted.
Beverly, that means I like
The
to
African
I like to
origin of
talk.
humanity is
I
known,
like to cut the food.
but we can only
no
say it is
food, no
accepted
fun.
when what necessarily follows is also known. An example
Can't be so
would be the
serious all the
African
time.
appearance of the first Europeans
I've
and
always
Asians,
been like that.
which
That's
is a
my
direct
just my
consequence of the African origin of humanity.
personality.
When illustrations of the first Europeans and Asians shows this fact, then we can say it has been accepted. The first members of the species Homo sapiens sapiens 200,000 years ago had the same intellectual capacity as the people of today.
I had an uncle, blessed and dead. He used to always say, he said, live for today, because tomorrow may be worse. Rips to him, rips the guy.
When this is finally accepted, it will change the way we look at Stone Age communities in the present day and will end the allegations of intellectual differences between the races. Chapter 8: Consequences of an African Origin. Consequences for human civilization. Our sub-Saharan origin as a species has had consequences for human history. The first modern humans spread out to the rest of the world. They had a sub-Saharan appearance. In northern Eurasia, European and East Asian appearances developed in the western and eastern sections of the region respectively. This was because it was easier to survive in an ice age with these appearances than with a sub-Saharan one. Shape aspects of such appearances are thought to have developed over the last 30,000 years, while pale complexion is thought to have developed within the last 8,000 years. Some humans left Africa but remained in tropical and subtropical regions like southern West Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. They retained the basic sub-Saharan appearance: heavily pigmented skin, tightly curled hair, generous facial features, and inclined facial angles. Not all such groups retained tightly curled hair. In some groups, the incidence of generous facial features was much reduced, but heavily pigmented skin was common to all the subtropically located people who did not descend from the northern Eurasians. Sometime within the last 6,000 years, there was a back migration to the subtropical and tropical regions from northern Eurasia. This explains the presence today of Caucasian appearance in the subtropical parts of Western Asia. It also explains the standard Southeast Asian and Polynesian appearances in subtropical and tropical Southeast Asia. In both regions, they coexist with heavily pigmented minorities who have either tightly curled or wavy hair. Around 20,000 years ago, some humans began the intensive collection of wild grasses and the intensive hunting of wild cattle. All of these developments took place either in Northeast Africa or the strip of Asia closest to Africa. These activities were a prelude to animal and plant domestication from 10,000 YA, which, in turn, were a prelude to the development of civilization. The actual civilizations themselves developed along the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates valleys in subtropical climates. These civilizations were founded on cultures that date back to 5000 BC, before even the first lightening skin gene was common in Europe. After back migrating to the tropics, the northern Eurasians found people of sub-Saharan appearance dominant in the subtropics. Only after thousands of years of intermixture did the northern Eurasian originating people become the dominant population. Why did this happen? Humans, given the choice, would rather live in a subtropical climate than an Arctic one. These were the very regions where the developments towards civilization were taking place. This meant that there was always going to be more than one back migration from northern Eurasia to the tropics. During ancient times, it was a continuous affair. A relatively small population can contribute greatly to the genetic heritage of a much larger population if there is a constant trickle from the smaller to the larger. Ireland is a country with a population of 3 million. Since 1700, it has produced a diaspora of 70 million, 23 times the home population, in 300 years. A pale-skinned population of even 30,000 in 3000 BC could contribute 100,000 people over a period of 1,000 years to the cities of the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, and the Levant. All that would be required is a less well-off population and the incentive of migrating to a wealthier, warmer place. After 2000 BC, these northern population movements intensified until by 1000 BC, they were the majority in Western Asia. Consequences for nutritional requirements. Our sub-Saharan origin as a species has had consequences for our nutritional requirements. Our bodies create vitamin D through bare skin exposure to sunlight. In the temperate zone, only summer sunlight, as exists in the tropics all year round, can produce vitamin D. This tells us that our bodies evolved to produce vitamin D from tropical levels of sunlight. If a scientist investigating human origins was only armed with this knowledge, it would be enough to suggest origins in the tropics for our species. In the tropics, sunlight is available for several hours of.
You know, some people think you just dumb. You know that. I don't know why people be. I know people be trolling this shit, trolling my number, trolling my phone, sending all kind of crazy text, spam calls and shit. Look here, now they really think I'm a dumb. They gonna send somebody gonna send me a text message talk about uh your to a PayPal issue. Your account has been restricted. Sign in and secure your account immediately. Want me to click on the link? I went, so I already know how messages look from PayPal. So I went to my app, to my account. I ain't got no message from them in the message center, right? So I come back to the text messages. I was trying to block it. It won't let me block the number. So I text back and said, y'all tried me, shaking my head. So the text couldn't be delivered. These motherfuckers really think somebody dumb. I'm going to click on a damn link so y'all can really hack my shit. Y'all got to get up early in the morning to fuck with a Capricorn. Y'all can't fuck with Deanna. Not Deanna Marie.
Almost every day of the year. It is reasonable that in such a situation, large amounts of vitamin D would become integral to the correct functioning of the human body. With this in mind, the following revelation becomes less surprising than would otherwise be the case. There's a growing mountain of evidence that indicates that having enough vitamin D in your body is essential to reducing your risk of every disease that we know of, every single one, no exaggeration. Why is vitamin D important again? By Dr. Ben Kim. In the tropics, heavily pigmented bare skin can create 10,000 to 25,000 IU of vitamin D in around 2 hours. In sub-Saharan Africa, people are often in the sun for more than 4 hours throughout the day. The safe limit of the vitamin, according to the US government and the Vitamin D Council, is 4,000 IU and 10,000 IU respectively. 2 hours is already above the limit, but solar-produced vitamin D never exceeds toxic levels. The fact that we cannot overdose on solar-produced vitamin D is also a result of our origins in the tropics.
Real funny to me.
Supplementary vitamin D, however, can exceed.
Rhonda, they got to get up early in the morning to get one over on the Capricorn. It ain't no corn like a Capricorn, because Capricorn better than popcorn.
Toxic levels. According to Dr. Kim, there is ongoing research on other beneficial compounds that are solar produced. When sunlight creates vitamin D in a healthy person, and that person's 25-hydroxy-D is in the optimal range, that person is almost certainly benefiting from other natural compounds that are generated with sunlight exposure. Dr. Hollick calls these other compounds photoproducts, and he and his team are currently researching the makeup and benefits of these photoproducts. How much vitamin D do you need for your best health? By Dr. Ben Kim. As a direct consequence of our sub-Saharan origin, we need solar-produced vitamin D in appreciable levels. This means we require summer sunlight. Heavily pigmented people require even more summer sunlight. At the same time, we spend more time indoors than at any period in history. Also alarming is that just as the sunlight vitamin reduces your risk of every single disease, lack of it increases your risk. A lack of vitamin D has been linked with cancers, bone problems, type 1 diabetes, and even multiple sclerosis. One recent study in the US found that nearly half of African American women of childbearing age may be deficient in vitamin D. White Europeans only evolved 5,500 years ago after food habits changed, by Daily Mail reporter, no name given. At this point, we should also ask a crucial question. Is the lack of vitamin D responsible for the earlier and more acute onset of various forms of cancer, diabetes, and high blood pressure amongst populations of African descent in the West? The message to all heavily pigmented people should be to take advantage of summer sunlight and make use of vitamin D supplements after consulting your doctor. We believe there is a quiet epidemic of vitamin D deficiency amongst heavily pigmented people. Consequences for lifestyle requirements. Our sub-Saharan origin as a species has had consequences for our lifestyle requirements. The lifestyle we led in Africa for over 100,000 years before any humans left played a role in shaping us. It did this to such a degree that we are required to maintain that lifestyle, whatever our recent origins, for our well-being. The online issue of Nature that appeared in November of 2004 stated, long-distance running was crucial in creating our current upright body form, according to a new theory. Researchers have suggested that our early ancestors were good endurance runners, and that their habit has left its evolutionary marks on our bodies, from our leg joints right up to our heads. The theory makes sense of a raft of human characteristics, Bramble and Lederman write in this week's Nature. Not only do we have springy Achilles tendons and stout leg joints, our hairlessness and tendency to sweat make us very good at dissipating heat. Distance Running Shaped Human Evolution by Michael Hopkin, November 2004. Other such physical traits include fluid-filled semicircular canals in the ear, which help control our balance when we accelerate. In humans, these canals are unusually large. The prominent shape of the human bottom, or gluteus maximus, to use the scientific term, is credited by the article to prehistoric running. The conclusion has to be that we descend from Paleolithic East African athletes. Having such ancestors comes with a responsibility. If we evolved to run, then adopting an armchair lifestyle is going against our evolution. It should not take a scientist to tell us that is not a good idea. In 2012, the BBC highlighted a scientific study that appeared in the world-renowned medical journal Lancet. The study stated that not being active kills as many people as smoking. In other words, adopting one of the most toxic habits known to us gives the same results as passively going against your evolution. In 2015, the BBC highlighted another scientific paper that appeared in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that said not being active kills twice as many people as obesity. They estimated that in Europe alone, over 600,000 lives could be saved annually if people did 20 minutes of brisk walking every day. Brisk walking is the nearest activity to running. It is no surprise such an activity is the best starting place for the inactive to mimic the requirements of our African evolution. If it is true that we evolved to run, there must be considerable evidence that running is a particularly beneficial activity for humans. Some of the obvious advantages and benefits of running are: 1. Nobody needs to be shown how to run, unlike many other exercises. 2. It is inexpensive. Other than a pair of good running shoes, no other equipment is necessary. 3. It can be done in any open environment where one can accelerate safely. 4. It works out the entire body. The legs, arms, and stomach muscles are all used in running. 5. It helps burn fat. 6. It helps regulate blood sugar. 7. Helps the bones to keep strong. 8. It improves mood and fights depression. With these facts, it should not take a scientific study to tell us that running will decrease our risk, as opposed to eliminating the risk, of developing a range of serious medical conditions, including heart disease and diabetes. The latter is connected to developing a whole host of other conditions, like high blood pressure and kidney disease. As long as we are not suffering from a serious medical condition for which one is advised to seek a doctor's consultation, we are built to run. Our African evolution provides a context why it is so beneficial for us. Conclusion: our sub-Saharan origins as a species have had consequences for our history, our nutritional requirements, and our lifestyle requirements. The progress towards civilization took place in the subtropical regions, hence the first city dwellers approximated a sub-Saharan appearance. The vitamin D levels produced...
Yeah, they some damn clowns, Rhonda. Cause my shit ain't no little, ain't no one of them motherfuckers you get at the damn store. My shit is a legitimate account with a chip in it. And every time a transaction made, before it even be made, they gonna contact me. And motherfucker better have a fingerprint to goddamn access my shit.
by a tropical sun meant that today
Damn
humans have
jokers,
high daily requirements
Clowns to the left
liver-produced
of me.
vitamin.
Jokers to
If they
the
cannot
right.
access
Here
this,
I am, stuck
supplementary
in the
vitamin D
middle.
must be taken to make up for the deficiency. Failure to do this increases the risk of a whole host of illnesses that might otherwise be avoided. This is especially important for those of African descent. The human body evolved to run. By running, we fulfill our evolutionary obligation and gain a host of health benefits. By failing to run, we go against our evolution and lose those benefits. These are the consequences of our sub-Saharan origins.
All right, my loves. That's been the end of that. I hope y'all have enjoyed this presentation. I don't know, it depends. I need to go. I need to run off for a minute or two. Go get me a little get taped up here around my edges. Run a couple more errands. I really ain't been able to right down to the convenience store earlier. I need to go to the car wash and everything. So I hope y'all enjoyed this, my loves. As always, this is your girl, Empress Goddess, the Georgia Peach with the sweet meat. Go within, my love, so you never go without. Because as above, so below. As within, so without.